Hello, my name's Keith Spencer. I'm a volunteer at the Woodlanders Lives and Landscapes project, where I've been focusing mainly on extracting and analysing census returns from local villages. But now I want to introduce you to a chap called Frederick Gilbert Webb, wonderful chap known as Gil, who lived in Wheeler End, and he was interviewed in 1987 at the age of 94, and his interview is the basis of this extract. Wickham, of course, is famous as a chair-making town, and in the campus of the university in the middle of High Wycombe there is a sculpture called the Bodger's Stand, designed by Deborah Mills. It's dedicated to the men and women who worked in the furniture industry and who, and I quote here, made chairs that were affordable and accessible to the masses. With the social changes that were happening in the 19th and 20th century, affordable, reasonably priced furniture was critical. And Wickham solved this problem by taking a fairly plain, simple but robust chair style and working out how you could break it down into its various components, and different people could focus on making each of those components. And not all those people needed to have inherent woodworking skills. But by working together, chairs were able to be made in numbers and at a price that was affordable. And Gil Webb was one of the people involved in that process. In this photograph, Gil Webb is at the back on the right, and seated in front of him is his wife Martha Plumridge, as was. The other couple are friends of theirs, John and Constance Knott. Now, Gil himself was born in Stokenchurch, and the family moved around farms within the Stokenchurch area. In 1901, the Webb family was living in Radnage in a flint cottage, and the picture we have here is of a flint cottage in that part of the world at that time. Not necessarily the exact cottage that they were living in, but at that sort of time. On leaving school, Gil followed his father into the farming community, and he became a farm labourer. And the next clips from the interview, Gil explains what life was like for him as a 16-year-old farm labourer. They were living at Chorley Farm, and the photograph we have here is of that farm near West Wickham, taken in about 1958. But it's very likely that the view 50 years earlier, when Gil was working there, was not radically different from what it was when this photograph was taken.
Another thing I can remember is droves of sheep coming through the village.
Yes.
That was quite regular, wasn't it?
I drove one lot through in the year 1907.
Where were you driving it from?
Tettsworth. We picked up 400 sheep at Tettsworth, me and the shepherd, because they had all those grazing routes on that big farm,
Yeah.
adjacent to where we were living. And I went with I went with the shepherd. We picked up these, and they'd travelled before we got them. Those sheep had travelled from Wheatley.
What, being driven along the road?
Yes. And we picked them up in the Icknield Way.
What, at Aston Round?
Yes.
Yeah.
And we drove them along Icknield Way out to the bottom of Chinnerhill, came out onto the road at Chinnerhill, drove the sheep up Chinnerhill, and then down Bledley Ridge to where we'd got to put them in the fields. Now, I went with a shepherd and his dog, and we came along from Aston Rowan along the Icknield Way to Chinner, and that was one of the heaviest thunderstorms, I believe, that ever I witnessed. We were soaked, and the sheep hadn't been sheared, and they were soaked also, and we had a job to get them to move. We had to split them up in little sections. And then, unfortunately, the old dog had had enough of it. He takes himself off home. He went off home and left us.
Although Gil was very much part of a farming agricultural community, there was some connection in his family with chair making. because his father owned a workshop behind the Red Lion public house. And this photograph we have here shows a similar relationship between a workshop, not necessarily Gil's grandfather's, but a workshop and a public house in Stokenchurch.
I was going to ask you too, you told me about, was it your grandfather's factory?
That's right, right at the back of the Red Lion.
Yeah, and that had got a pole lathe.
Yes, and one of the ordinary treadle lathes. Because you see, his business, my grandfather's business, was chiefly making chair parts such as Caxtons and all the likes of those kind of things he was engaged in. And then he used to take them to Wickham, down to Tommy Mealian's at Wickham, by the van load.
What, horse and van?
With his horse and van, yes.
Yeah.
He'd got horse and van, he'd also got a dog cart.
Gil then explains how the whole process started, with his grandfather going to auctions at the King's Arms in Stokenchurch and bidding for folds of standing timber. Philip Vickers, who conducted the interview of Gil, asks Gil how the whole process started. How was the timber initially processed?
Now what about the planks? Was it cut in planks in the wood?
No.
Where did they bring it to?
Well, I should think his mostly came to the Ardin sawmill, which was the side of the Lion, the Red Lion.
Oh, I know, yes. And was that a mechanical saw?
Yes, they've got the big run along on rollers, you know, with the big circular saw.
And this is way back when you were a youngster?
Yes.
They got a circular saw like that in the 1890s?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't realise they were that...
Well, I had a father-in-law who used to do the pit sawing.
Yes, yeah.
With one underneath and one up top.
Yeah.
And convert. He used to work in the yard at West Wickham Station.
Well, your grandfather did this, but Windsor back chairs.
Yeah.
You know the bend in them?
Yes.
Did they bend those in the village, or did they buy them already?
Oh no,
bent?
he had them bend down in Wickham.
And that was done in steam, was it?
Yes, they were steam done. I'll tell you where I think they came from. I wouldn't be quite sure, but I think they came from Plumridge's, the big sawmills in Wickham.
And they'd actually bent them?
They bent the bows and they brought them home with a strap across the base.
Gil, of course, was part of a farming agricultural community, and he never actually worked for his grandfather. However, in 1915 he married Martha, a member of the Plumridge family, and they were involved in chairmaking, and it's likely that after that marriage he made the switch, because by the time of the 1921 census he's not shown as a farm labourer now, but as someone doing bench work in the chairmaking industry, and he was working for Abbott and Stone in West Wickham. A fitting conclusion to the interview, and indeed to Gil's life, he died 3 years later, came when he reminisces about his unfulfilled ambitions.
Yeah, George Bracey used to make tennis rackets, didn't
That's
he?
right, because I tried to get in with George Bracey. I wanted to be one of those that could make a tennis racket, and I tried to get in with George Bracey. He worked up, I don't know. But I wanted to get into that trade.
Yeah.
I itched to become someone that could make a tennis racket. I've itched in my time to become a person who could make a good violin.
Yeah.
Now, those two were
things.
two of the things that were prominent in my mind
Well, you can
that
see-
I would like to have achieved.
Gil Webb never did get to make his tennis rackets or his violin. But the fact that someone with his background, who started off life tending the kitchen garden of a farmer's wife and driving saturated sheep around Totteridge, the fact that he could even have ambitions like that shows just how much his life had changed from the way when he left school. And in that he was like so many other of the many people who are commemorated by the Bodgers Stand sculpture.